You're on.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Renee, and I'm an alcoholic. And I want to thank you for the invite. And you know, I used to say honor. You know, it's an honor to be asked to do anything. It's an honor to talk. But I'll tell you what it's turned into in this phase of my development that I'm in right now. It's like it's a responsibility. You know, like one of the reasons why I get nervous to share my story is that not because of pride or ego or anything. My story is my story. It's because I feel this deep responsibility to be able to communicate to you all a message of hope that has depth and weight, that something that I can share with you would give someone some hope, whether you have an hour or whether you have, you know, 10 years, 10 days, 10 months. So I take it quite seriously. My sobriety date is March 21st, 1992. When I moved down to Tennessee, I moved down like the week before my 30th anniversary. And I'll tell you what, I felt like a fish out of water. You know, I just was so homesick, and, you know, I didn't get to celebrate something so, you know, in my life, so huge. You know, I was with, you know, no one that I really knew from, you know, the 30 years, right? And Tennessee was so gracious and has been so welcoming to me and John, and I'm so grateful. But I like to start out reading this paragraph I found a while ago. I actually went down to Richmond and heard a girl share, and she started her talk out with this. And for me, it just kind of like invites God into the conversation, which is what I hope we're having. I'm not lecturing anyone. I'm just going to share my story with you. So it's in the chapter Gratitude in Action. It's the first paragraph. It says, I believe it would be good to tell the story of my life. Doing so will give me the opportunity to remember that I must be grateful to God. And I like that it's grateful to God and those members of Alcoholics Anonymous who knew AA before me. Telling my story reminds me that I could go back to where I was if I forget the wonderful things that have been given to me, or forget that God is the guide who keeps me on this path. And it's a great reminder, like God is the one, and thank God a sponsor took me to God, right? However that God looks for you, but it's, you know, it's not my sponsor, it's not the group, it's not, you know, it's that relationship with God that's going to keep me sober under any and all conditions. You know, people will let you down, you know, you will, if your sponsor is doing a good job, that sponsor is taking you to some higher power, you know, that's bigger than you, then you can figure out what's bigger and badder than your disease. And then you're going to start turning all kinds of other stuff. Once you turn that alcohol over, I turned the alcohol over, and then as I go along the path, I have to turn more surrenders, more things over, right? I just recently had to turn a granddaughter over to my higher power. Like I had never had one of those before to give to God to take care of, right? So each phase of my development, you know, I have to remember it's not just like one time I do a third step with this beautiful place, and, you know, and I forget that God's going to keep giving me these beautiful things in my life. And I have to remember that, you know, I'm not in charge of all those things. So, you know, my story is, if I tell you that I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a real alcoholic based on the information in this book, there's a lot of places that I read that qualified me as an alcoholic of the variety that this program will work the best for, right? There's all kinds of ways to get sober, all kinds of ways I've seen people, you know, have beautiful lives without Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, they've been able to stay stopped, and that wasn't my experience. I couldn't find that until I came to AA. So I started reading about what kind of alcoholic would do well in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I qualified. There was a lot of questions. There was a lot of information in those first chapters about that. So, you know, that's what I can identify as. I'm a real alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic of the variety that is described in this book. And if I give you the other part of my information of where I came from, I grew up in an alcoholic home with an alcoholic mother. That gives you a lot of other information if you grew up in a house that had an alcoholic in it. You know, that's a lot of background. It's a loaded piece of information. So I was raised with a single mom and a little baby brother. And then on the weekends, I got to go to my dad's house, who was not an alcoholic. He was salt of the earth. He was a stand-up guy that kind of just knew how to live life, moral compass, straight on, you know, a great, good person, respected and loved by many people. I learned that at his retirement party. I'll tell you about that later, because that was a life-changing experience. You know, so that was very confusing. And I think that there were things going on in my house and in my life that a young girl didn't have the tools or the information to process. You know, I started to get very confused about, you know, the emotions that were going through me. I'm a feeler. I don't know if there's any of you on this call that are feelers like me. I feel everything to the magnitude that you can't even process. I start to vibrate, you know, with emotions sometimes. And I think the alcohol worked in getting me through that time of my life where, you know, there were things happening in that neighborhood that a little girl shouldn't have been a part of, right? There were no systems in place in that time to give more protection to young kids in the neighborhood, and, you know, a sexual offenders list. There was none of that going on back then. And you were shush about therapy. Like, people weren't just open, and it wasn't a cool thing to go get help and stuff like that. So, you know, the alcohol worked for me. I started drinking in 6th grade. And it just, I think, got me through. You know, it just made it bearable to live in the life that I was living. I was so confused. I was so sad all the time. I missed my dad all the time. And, you know, I talk about those feelings because you know, even in sobriety, I have to figure out ways to deal with them so that, you know, the drink doesn't look like a good option, right? Mind, body, and spirit, you know. And it was like, you know, I think that the alcohol just gave me enough time so that I wouldn't have committed suicide. And I found some other ways to deal with my life because I was about ready to get there very quickly. So I drank, blackout drinker from about 13 years old. I was a blackout drinker. I knew I didn't drink like the other girls. They were going to the suburban hospital getting their stomach pumped, and I'm pissed off because, you know, we just got started and now this girl's in the hospital and what's wrong with her. And then I had shag carpet. I don't know if you all remember shag carpet, but and they would puke, these girls would puke in the shag carpet, and I'd have to try to get it out. And oh God, I was like, these girls just suck. So then I started hanging out with older people. So that's when I really started to, you know, seek lower companionship. I started hanging out with, you know, I was only 16, 15, hanging out with 30-year-old people, usually men, and spent a lot of time in downtown Washington, D.C. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, right outside of, you know, Chevy Chase, Bethesda area. And so we would go down to Washington, D.C. And back in the day, Southwest D.C. was not a place where young girls from the suburbs should be hanging out. And if I couldn't make it down there, I would go over to Lincoln Park and over near Twinbrook. And that was not a place that I should have been either. So, you know, that's a little part of where I came from. I was a street rat. I loved to run around in the streets. I loved to hang out. I was never home. I was always, you know, coming to in alleyways or outside on someone's lawn or behind a bush or something like that. And it wasn't pretty. It certainly wasn't really what I believe was a safe, you know, a safe childhood or anything. You know, I'm not one of those overanalyzers about, you know, all of that, but it wasn't good. And my time was running out. And I don't know how I survived, you know, all those times where, you know, the homeless people in DC were taking care of me and I had to figure out how to get home. So that's not normal drinking for a young lady, okay? And I end up down at Radford, Virginia, you know, and this is unmanageability. I'm talking about, you know, this is a young girl who's at least half of my parents, you know, had something to offer me to give me a leg up. And my father tried his best, you know, but he didn't know what was going on. And I got accepted to go to this little college in Radford, Virginia. And I only knew about, you know, how to apply to colleges because I went to a pretty, you know, upscale high school. They took the girls, the people from where I grew up and bussed them over. It was when they were redistricting and brought the poor kids over to, you know, Old Georgetown Road was like upper class, whatever. And they were going to college. So no one in my family had ever gone. So I applied because I, you know, I was really running out. I was burning a lot of bridges around where I was growing up, and people were tired of me, and it was getting kind of dark. And I always say that because like that darkness of what happens is that soul sickness that we have, right? It's that malady that is exclusive to alcoholics of our type. And it's dark, you know, that spiritual malady is described, I've heard it many times, the hole in your soul or the darkness, you know, and it can present in so many different ways, you know, and it was that hole was starting, and the moral compass was broken already, you know, at a young age. You know, I'm involved in things that, you know, were against everything that I was taught, you know, with my dad. And so I go down to this little town, and I surrendered within 2 years of being down there. You know, that hole got really dark, and I was hanging out with Appalachian Mountain people drinking moonshine and in the streets of downtown Radford, Virginia. And it's, you know, it is not pretty. It is not pretty at all. And so I just like to say that, you know, we never know how that seed, when we share that we're sober or that we've been to AA, you know, when someone gets that little bit of information about us and they watch us and how we live our lives. Because most of us, if we're sober and you get sober and you work the steps and you have a spiritual experience, there's something about us that people notice that's different. I don't know if it's, you know, people have described it, you know, the shining of your eyes or the shining of your spirit, you know, what we have going on inside shoots out of our body, you know, and we bring a lot of joy and peace into the world. And this man that I knew was sober, and that's what was happening. He was showing up, and I'd see him, and there was a calmness about him. There was, you know, he wasn't drinking, which was big because I partied with him, and he drank like I did, and he was going to AA, and he was sober. And I thought, you know, for the year I tried to quit drinking down in Radford, I was drunker and I was in more pain, and that black hole was getting darker, and the moral compass was more broken. And I had started to do things that I never, ever, ever thought I would ever do. And they were against everything that I believe God made me and intended for me in my life. And I remember this guy was sober, and he had shared with me about AA, that was what was working for him. And I called the hotline. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that this guy from my, you know, where I grew up had shared that with me, because I don't know if, you know, I would have found it in time. And I showed up at this AA meeting, and for me, you know, that was the second and the third step. You know, being willing to just pick up the phone and go and borrow a car from my roommate, who was so happy that I was going to get sober or try to get sober because her life was just miserable. And I found AA, and I never had a drink after that. I showed up at that little meeting at the psych hospital, and there were a bunch of old men, Appalachian men, like they had beards, and they were from the mountains that would come down and have this AA meeting at the hospital. No teeth and stuff. I don't, you know, we know about no teeth in AA. I don't know what it is with the teeth, but come in and sit down. We'll help you get some new teeth. It works, I promise. And so we sat down, and I remember them asking me, you know, what they could do to help me. You know, that is really what we're here to do, is to be helpful. You know, can we share some hope with you that might, you know, work to help you not have to take a drink today? And so these guys, there were about 10 of them. There were no young girls, college girls getting sober down there in Radford at that time. And they loaded me up with literature, and they gave me some numbers, and they suggested maybe I go down to Blacksburg, Virginia Tech. Maybe there were some more young people there. But I never had a drink after that. And that was February 17th of 1989. And, I was separated from alcohol. And my life got different. I was a biochemistry major. I love that about alcoholics. We are just magnificent, smart, creative. Like, I love it. I would love to hear, all the great things that all of you in these squares do in your lives. Like, we're just magnificent. I love that about Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcohol is just the great leveler. It doesn't care where we come from, how smart we are, or what kind of job we could do. It'll level us down to the same, sitting in an AA meeting thinking, our lives are over. And so I just kept coming. And, what happened to me was, in 3 years of attending AA, a lot of half measures, a lot of a la carte, there was take what you want and leave the rest type of stuff going on. And I have found that, I can take what I want and then save the rest for later when I might need it down the road, and not pick and choose what I was going to do in the program. Or, I understood that, alcohol came in lumpy forms. And at the end of those 3 years of going to AA and picking up chips and, really thinking I'm working AA, but, that lumpy liquor took me to my knees, just to where alcohol had taken me. And I found myself in a closet, curled up in a ball, and surrendered to a depth that I was married to someone that I had met in an AA meeting that I had no business being married to. My dad hadn't talked to me in 2 years. My mom hadn't talked to me in a year. And, I knew I was in trouble, and I knew I was going to drink again. And that scared me. I had this thought, that I recognized as an alcoholic getting ready to pick up a drink. And I knew what that life looked like. So I threw myself into AA. I found an AA club. And I turned my everything. I made that decision that everything, every single thing, the husband I was married to at the time, every old idea that I had about what the program was, I got rid of all of it. An old idea can be from this morning. An old idea can be from, a week ago, right? It's not just old ideas from how we grew up, or from when we were drinking. An old idea, man, it can be from an hour ago, actually. And so I had to get rid of all these old ideas. And I just, I fell into this group in Gaithersburg, Maryland, that they loved me back to life. I had never, in that first experience with Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew they cared, and I knew, while I was in that meeting, I was safe. And this was a group that, it was beyond the hour meeting. It was in between the meetings. What were you doing? And I put myself in my sponsor's back pocket, and, we would, go to the store together, or fold laundry, or, I had no idea how to do anything. What color socks to wear, right, was the question of the day. I was done. I was toast. And I had that husband I had to figure out how to get away from. And, I ended up, in my first year of sobriety, I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter, and I left that husband 7 months pregnant. I was a little over a year sober. And by this time, I'm just still not drooling, right? I've been crying and drooling for about a year and a half, reading the steps, going to treatment centers, going to court with people. It was a real service-oriented group. And I started to understand the difference between a meeting and a group. So a meeting is, the hour meeting, but a group is a 3 legacy group. It's unity, service, and recovery. So are the people in that group getting sober, staying sober? Are they taking a meeting into an institution? And what that looked like? What is a 3, in unity. Is it a unity? And is the club unit? Is the meeting group is they do inventory almost regularly, right? To find out how they can be more effective, all those kinds of things. So I did it. I just threw myself at their mercy, and they just loved me back to life. And, you know, they taught me how to be a sister. You know, they taught me how to get my dad back in my life, right? You know, that fourth step when I went through everything and I put in my victim card down on the table, and I forgave at a level that I'd never known that you could forgive, which for me, four-step work is forgiveness, you know, forgiveness and love. And, you know, who am I? If I'm asking forgiveness, I know God has forgiven me for some huge stuff, like the big stuff that, you know, I still wonder, I don't know what's going to happen, but, you know, I know God has forgiven me. And, you know, it's my job then to forgive the next person. I can't ask for forgiveness for myself and not give it freely to other people. And, you know, in my sobriety, I've seen other people, someone on this call forgave at a depth and level that sometimes in our lifetime, you're not asked, you know, you don't even have things that come up like that. But I know in this program, you can forgive the worst things of the worst. And I've seen proof in my life and many other people's lives, and they've gotten free. And that's the whole deal here, is to get free. How free did I want to be? I could hold on to that stuff, or I could get free. And I didn't want to be, you know, I didn't want to be that person that was just the victim. And, you know, I wanted more space for God. So I cleaned up all that stuff. I cleaned out all that stuff that had blocked me off from God and you all, the people in the world that, you know, God sends me to be in their lives. And I started to get those relationships back. And, you know, that was fourth and fifth step work, is clearing out that space that has been blocked so that I can have a relationship with a higher power, and I can show up and have deep, intimate relationships with other people. You know, and that's different than just being an acquaintance. That's different than just, you know, at the hour meeting, giving your number out. You know, that's like that girl that's shaking. She doesn't know how to go to the grocery store because she's petrified she'll go down that aisle and get the wine. Well, you go with her to the grocery store. You know, she goes to court to get her kids back. You know, you don't just pat her on the back and wish her good luck. You know, if you can, you go to court and you sit there with her, and you know, like they did with me, you know. And so anyway, I started to live my life on a basis that was, you know, spiritual and not down here, you know, transactional. You know, I'll do something for you, you do something for me. It was spiritual, you know, it was not expecting anything in return. And my life got better. It got, you know, full. It got full of all those relationships. You know, the ex-husband still has never met my 28-year-old daughter. You know, I got remarried in the program. I met a man at that club I got sober at, and we got married and had two more beautiful children. It was 7 years. I was 7 years sober before I got a sponsee that stuck. And that's Lisa. And, you know, it took 7 years for me to have anything that, you know, had depth and weight, that had an understanding of the book, that had a spiritual path that I could show someone, you know, how to have that. And that is the highlight of my life today. But you know, I had to go through those years of the psychic change that occurs. And for me, that happened in, I had a sponsor for 20 years. Her name was Nancy. And she's the one that gave me that space, that gave me that direction to act my way and learn how to be a woman of grace and dignity, you know, learn how to dress appropriately, learn how to talk appropriately, like go into a McDonald's dressed in a way where I wouldn't embarrass a grandfather and their young grandchildren or a family, right? Like that's how I got to you all. I didn't know how to dress. I didn't know how to talk. I didn't know how to act. And so she taught me, you know, how to be a lady, you know, and do service. And, get out of myself long enough to let God do something, right? Give him some room to show me what I'm supposed to do for him today. And so when we made that list and I started to go make some of those amends, I took her the list and I sat down at her. She had a dining room table that we used to sit down at to do step work. And I don't know about you, but I put the big ones on the top, let's get them over. And I put these names on the top of that list, and I was shaking, I was sweating, and then I stopped her. And I had something that I needed to tell her that I don't know if I can't honestly tell you if I intentionally didn't talk about it in the fifth step or not. I to this day, I don't know. I would tell you if I did, I don't care anymore. But I told her something before we started looking at the list that I didn't think I'd ever be able to share with another human being. I dropped the rock. I shared the one thing that I was most ashamed of, and I shared it because I wanted what the 8th and 9th step was going to get ready to offer me and the rest of the program. And I share that all the time because, like, if you don't do it right at 5, or if you don't, there's still time. Like, there's still time. And I believe that that's why the 8th and 9th step were so special to me, was because I had such a deep yearning to have the freedom from those steps that I didn't want anything to hold me back. And so I sit down with the list, and the first name she crosses the off, right? And she says, leave that poor person alone. Don't talk to them. Don't send them a Christmas card. You've done enough. And I thought, okay, this is pretty good. This is going to be all right. Like, that's your amends, is just to leave them alone. And then it wasn't as easy going down the list. But, I walked away from there ready to face these things, right? Because this was more stuff that was blocking me. If I had run into one of these people on the street, I probably wouldn't have felt okay. I wouldn't have been able to look them in the eye. And so I started going back to these people. And for me, that's why I believe that this is where, that psychic change really started to occur, because, I could face these people. And I started to understand that my disease was cunning, baffling, like what I thought was real was not happening. They said, what are you talking about? Like, they had a whole different rendition of what was happening in these situations that I had just been so embarrassed to even talk to these people. They just loved me and missed me. And I didn't owe them $500. They didn't even know what I was talking about. And, I was willing to do whatever I had to do. I've only had 2 amends that weren't received. And one then 5 years later came back to me into my life. And that's my brother, and I accepted him with open arms. That was a recent one. And that was pretty, I'll talk about that. That's more about 11th and 12th step, but that's what happened to me. At 9, I found out that, my disease is just, it's la la land is the best way to describe it. What I thought was real was not real. And then I started to have all these people back in my life that just love me and miss me. And, and I try to always, just look at the whole situation as, is this my perception? Is this the way I'm seeing it, or is this reality? Right. And as long as I keep that channel open to God, I usually have that intuitive thought. I usually have that intuitive action. I just kind of know what's the right thing. Like, my gut doesn't feel right if I'm thinking about something and it's not the right idea. You have a physical reaction. That's the gut feeling, because that's where God is. Your stomach hurts, you can't sleep, it's probably an indication. And I don't like to live like that, going against that. Sometimes when I do it, it's so bad that it's like, it keeps it at bay for a while, because I don't like to feel like that. I don't like to make the wrong decision, when I know it's the wrong decision. But thank God for a sponsor. I need a sponsor just as much today, if not more, than when I first got here, because like I said, I can get off the path and it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be good. And, so I'll tell you what happened. Those relationships that started to mend and heal, I've been able to show up in my life in ways that I could never have imagined. I never could have thought. Have you all ever had, I want you to think about this, like a moment where you've just looked almost out of your body and looked down, like, how did you get here? Like, how did I end up right here, right now in this moment with this life when I should be behind an alley, an alleyway behind a dumpster, like drunk somewhere, or some dingy bar where I like to drink. I was a, Irish beer drinker, Irish Catholic, dark and dirty pubs were my thing. And here I am. I'm in Lebanon, Tennessee. You got to say it right. And I have a granddaughter that I get to see multiple times a week. I have, been able to care and take care of both of my parents, with hospice and hold them when they've taken their last breath. Both of my parents, my mother at my home, my dad with his wife and at their home, like in bed with them, like there, like on it. And, I couldn't do that if I was drinking. I couldn't do the things that, were just, I couldn't have imagined what you get to do when you get and stay sober. And when I was doing all that, I was raising kids. I got to be a stay-at-home mom, which was my dream, which was against everything that I was raised to be. And I got to do that. And I did the best I could. It was my job and I loved it. And I cherished every second of it. But AA taught me that, it was okay, to do both. Like, I didn't have to just do AA. I did AA, 100%, but I also didn't miss anything of my kids. I didn't miss a football game. I didn't miss a wrestling match. I didn't miss, the horseback riding stuff. Thank God for Lisa, because she helped me keep that going. I got to do it all. I really did. I believe if we get sober and we put every trust and ask God every morning to show us what he needs for us to do for him, we can have it all. So, at that time, I didn't get to go to conventions or go to weekend, things, because I didn't miss anything of my kids. But, I went to early bird if I had to, and I went to the noon meeting if I had to, and I had to change, each season of my, the kids' lives. When the schedule came out, I had to change my meetings around, but I made it happen. I always had AA, and I always was able to show up for my kids. And then about 15 years of sobriety, the ceiling fell down. Thank God they didn't lie to me. They said, money, no money, trials and tribulations are going to come. And that's what happened. We had a big, huge rearrangement of life. My husband got spiritually sick and betrayed our marriage. We lost a business. Our house was in foreclosure. The cars were repossessed. It was in 2008 when the bottom fell out of a lot of stuff. We lost everything. The kids had to come out of their schools. But we had AA. We had AA love us back, just like in the beginning. Like they just loved us back. They loved our children. They showed up and took care of our kids. We built, a marriage, back on a foundation. Our foundation was strong. That's why we're still together today. We've been married over 26 years. We didn't have to blow up our life. We were given a set of principles here that, include love and tolerance and forgiveness. And we applied that to all areas of our life. And we applied it to the business, and we built a new business. We didn't give up. And we just kept asking God what we were supposed to do. If it was to leave that house, we would have left it, and we were ready to do anything. And we got through that. And I had never felt closer to my higher power during that time. Like, I've gone through a season right now, a phase of development where I've never, I've struggled. I lost my dad a year ago, and my husband started to travel for work at the same time. And I was alone a lot, like physically alone. The kids are all grown and gone, and 2 of them lived here in Tennessee. And you know, I was home hours and days alone. And thank God for Zoom meetings, because I could just hop on. You know, I have no problem with Zoom meetings, because there were times at 10 o'clock at night, I was so alone. You know, I didn't want to drink, but I was alone. And sometimes I just needed that connection. You know, I had God, I knew that, but after a year of it, it's like, okay, you know, I needed some conversation. I was talking to the dog like it was a person. And, you know, and that's what's gotten me through that relationship with a higher power. You know, even though I was physically alone, I knew that whatever was going on, God needed some time with me, you know, and we would just talk. You know, my higher power and I are like, you know, he's my homie. I can talk to him however, I can cuss at him, I can cry, he doesn't care. I don't have to say certain prayers. It's like, oh God, what are we going to do today? Or what are you going to have me do today? Or whatever. And so I got alone for about a long year. And then finally, when we had the opportunity to move, we sold everything in Maryland. You know, we watched Lisa and Tommy do it a year before us. And, you know, I knew it's just like everything in this program. There's going to be someone a couple steps in front of you, right? A couple steps in front of you, and then you're going to have your turn. And I knew I could do it. I knew that it was important to be here and be the kind of grandmother that I've always wanted to be. Because I didn't have that, you know, I didn't have that. I stood with girls, you know, that I sponsored when they buried their grandmothers. And I felt what that relationship was like. And I want that so bad. Like I just want the opportunity to try. And so I knew I had to move. And, you know, moving after 30 years of an AA life and the AA family that I had, it was rough. But I'll tell you what I did. I got down here. I got into the jail right away, which is my love. I love going into the jail and taking a meeting into the jail. I got 2 home groups with my sponsor got mad and said, not mad, she didn't get mad, not a child, but she said, Renee, get 1 home group, pick 1 home group. So I did, I picked one, and, you know, I got service position. I got, you know, a couple young girls, you know, that asked me to take them through the book. I went and invited myself to a women's literature, AA literature group that had, you know, they were like these old timers. I invited myself because let me tell you, like my life depends on this stuff. I needed some connection. And so, you know, I put my pride and ego aside and I just started showing up where these girls were having dinner before the meeting. You know, I felt like the newcomer. I felt like a little 12-year-old girl, like, will you be my friend? You know, and here I am 54 years old and I'm like, you know, but I didn't care. Like, I didn't care. And because I'm telling you the truth, I am not under the illusion that I, you know, if I don't continue to do these things, I could drink again. I've seen it happen after 30 years. I've seen it, you know, maybe it might not be alcohol. It might be something else. If I don't give my disease the respect it deserves, you know, some of these surgeries and things that we have to have when we're older and things start to happen, you know, you just go into it thinking, oh, well, pills weren't my problem, or, you know, I've seen it happen. You know, I have to respect my disease in all forms. And that's, you know, spiritually, bodily, mentally, all those things. It's a mind, body, and spirit. And so, you know, I threw myself like a newcomer into this thing down here. And, you know, I know it's going to be okay. I know I still don't feel like, you know, it took 30 years to get what I had up there, and it's going to be okay. And I can tell you when that little granddaughter comes over here and doesn't want me to put her down and she doesn't want to go to her parents, I know I made the right decision. You know, I get a chance to have a relationship with another human being that only sober I have the chance to be, and you know, to be a grandmother. I never would have thought. And, you know, I like to share the story about my brother because that's also been in the last year. When our father was dying, he came back, and what got me through that was for 5 years he wouldn't have anything to do with me after our mother died, and I learned something from that. you know, when someone doesn't like you and they say they don't like you, that's one thing, but he wouldn't even say that. He was indifferent. He wouldn't even speak to me or tell me why he was upset or anything. And I learned that that's not okay. You know, like if someone's asking you what's wrong, it's decent, it's human decency to tell them what's wrong. And even if you don't want to be their friend, I mean, he wouldn't even talk to me. And so, you know, I only have one brother, I only have one sibling, and I just struggled. I struggled. I did inventory, I prayed, I lit candles, I went to church, I did everything, anything and everything I knew to do. I sent him a birthday card every year, and just signed my name, you know, love always your sister. I couldn't say I missed him or anything. I followed directions of just doing the things that was suggested. And I had a moment of clarity, and I like to share this because maybe there's something, you know, similar going on, and I've been able to use this in my life since then. But I was in a meeting, and I looked around the meeting, and I saw about, I don't know, 30 to 50 brothers that God had sent to me. You know, Tommy has been more of a brother to me in the last 30 years than my brother ever has been, you know, and I started to realize that, you know, it's not always going to look the way I think it's going to look. And that I got peace, and I understood that, you know, that my brain is only this big and God's infinite wisdom is that big. And I looked around and I knew God was taking care of me and it was going to be okay. And so a year later, my brother shows up, and, you know, to this day, we still haven't talked about it. I just offered him love and grace and tolerance and forgiveness. And, you know, we text every day. There's not a day that goes by. You know, his wife had left him when my dad died. He's all alone. You know, and I just don't know. I don't know. I don't need to have that conversation. I don't even need to be right about anything. I just needed to offer him some grace and some love, like AA gave me, you know, and just tolerated me for so long until I wasn't a nuisance to every group that I went to. And, you know, and that's how he shows up in my life. You know, God will just give me those moments where it all makes sense. And if I don't give up and I don't drink, you know, I have a pretty free life. It's free. You know, I can get through life with grace and forgiveness, and I can enjoy my life. One of the greatest things, I was, like I said, I was sad all the time, you know, and I can be lonely, or I can be alone in this house for a week at a time, but I'm not sad. You know, if I'm sad, it's fleeting. I call somebody, I go see my granddaughter, I do something. I don't have to just live in that over and over. I have things that, other than alcohol, to make my life not sad all the time. So I just want to say that, you know, this program continues to work in my life. I continue to get excited about the things that God puts in my path to share my program with. In the book, the program, not my program, the program on the Alcoholics Anonymous still works the same that it was given so freely to me. And I get to, you know, show someone that maybe it's okay to get rid of some of that stuff that's blocking you from your higher power, and show them what it can be like. You know, my job is to be there for the next suffering alcoholic and maybe give them some hope. You know, I also have a stepmother that, you know, was our relationship was horrible. Those amends to her were some of the hardest that I made. And today she tells me she doesn't even remember those years. You know, she's only remembers the best. And she really thought when my dad died that I would be out of her life. And, you know, there's not a day that goes by that I don't call her, that we don't talk. And I've been able to show up for her since my dad died as her family. You know, they didn't have any kids. I'm her daughter, you know, and only from you guys, only you guys teaching me that it's not transactional, it's spiritual. I get to show up for people. So with that, I'll close and thank you again for letting me share with you tonight.